Regardless of our political affiliation, there was a poem that I've shared before in Reflections during Advent, a poem that was offered at the most previous presidential inauguration by Amanda Gorman, the youngest poet laureate. And what she does is she shares about the imagery of light and shade in a way that I think is very Advent-like. Speaks to joy in the midst of the darkness. And so I'd like to use that to begin today. I excerpted it. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, the sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. I thought of that this morning as I was reflecting and driving in here today, that oftentimes the shade and the shadows, the darkness, can cause us to complain, can cause us to focus on those things. For example, as I was driving here this morning, speaking to my mom on the phone, and we were talking about this and that. She goes, "How are you?" I said, "Oh, it's raining, it's cold, and there's no sun." And then she goes, "Oh, and you have to wear pink." And I said, "I know, but it's really rose. It's really rose colored, not pink." And she goes, "I know your color palette is brown and black, Bill, so this is going to be hard for you." I said, "Thanks for reminding me." I was just kind of like, after a long week with this weather. And I have to say, it was when we were reading from James in the second reading. And he says, "Do not complain." And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And then when you saw in the psalm, if you looked over here and you saw the children's choir, just the complete joy of looking at their papers and singing so beautifully was like light in the midst of the shade. And then to see a little brother just staring in awe from the pew. Light in the midst of the shade. Joy in the midst of the pain and the sorrow. For on this Gaudete Sunday, I think what we're asked to reflect upon, in the midst of the emptiness of the steppe and the desert, in the midst of the lack of bloom that we might often experience and focus on, when we might get tired and worn out, when we are just, it's raining and cold. In the midst of all those experiences, what Christ does in this midst, in our midst today, in this space, is reminds us of the power of being light, of being joy, because Christ is near, whether you feel it or not. For when John the Baptist from prison hears about Jesus, he sends disciples, says, "Are you the one, or should we, wait for another?" It's almost like he's tired of waiting. Tell us if you're the one, Jesus, because otherwise we'll stop wasting our time. It sounds like he's experiencing that same sort of, And what Jesus says is not, "Yes, I am the one," but what Jesus does, which is incredible, is says to his disciples, "Go and tell John of the wonders you're seeing. That the deaf can hear, that the blind can see, right? That the excluded are now brought in to communion. That people know their worth." He says, this is evidence that the Messiah is here. For our Advent task, friends, is to be, even if a small candle light, to be the candle, to be the light of Christ in the midst of the darkness, of the shade, of the emptiness. It's to be the joy and to focus on what the wonders of God doing in our midst, when so often our world tries to remind us of the negative, tries to pull us to bend in the other direction, so that we can then, by being that light, help show the way of the Lord for others, that they might know their worth. They might know that they are valued and brought in to communion, that they have a place here, that they might experience the same joy that these children have when they are singing and we are participating with them. For the task of Advent is to be an Advent figure, to be those who are taking the charge of Jesus Christ seriously, who says, go and tell, look up, see the good in your midst. So that if we can do that, if we can see the good, we might be that good in how we live out Christ's mission. And then the light might be a little brighter to dispel the darkness of these days. I'll give you an example. This past week, one of my students had a surgery, and the surgery didn't go well, and he ended up missing a lot of days of school. And each day as we came to class, the students would say, we want to pray for him. And they would pray for him. And each day we got to Friday, and finally the students were like, where is he? We miss him. And so one has this idea, this is a very teenager thing. He goes up, he takes his phone to the edge of the room, and he takes a Snapchat. And he takes the photo and he writes in it, we miss you, and we hope you're doing okay. Immediately, that boy who had been out all week, who had been isolated in hospitals, who had been struggling with the midst of recovering from the surgery, experiencing certainly the emptiness, the shade, right? Without us really even knowing it, responds, you don't know how much that means. Something so little, and yet reminded him of his worth. That he was missed, that he had a place. For how are we being called to be that light, however small, and how we bring people to Christ, remind them who they are, and in doing so, witnessing to a kind of joy that does not fade, because why? The Lord is near. The Lord is here. So as we come to this Eucharist today, let us ask for that strength. Let us ask for the strength to be that light in the midst of the shade. For when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, the sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it.